Who's that?
Okay, I'm going to introduce him in a second. So just give us a few moments, Sam. Okay.
Sam, it's Margaret.
Hello, my darling.
How are you?
Wonderful, sweetheart. And you?
Very well, thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's good to be seen. We haven't heard you reading for a while.
I will be back.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our speaker is on. So what I'm going to be doing is muting everybody, and then I'm going to ask Tom to unmute so that he'll be able to speak, and also Shari Shalom. So we're looking forward to a wonderful talk and soup.
Is everybody here okay? Anyone here? Agree? And there's a few people, a few kids at home. So can you hear me okay? Kind of.
Me, I can, yes.
Right, okay. Right. So everybody, this is Tom Palmer, who is an author from the UK who writes a lot of children's books. His favourite books, if I am correct, are football. But one of the books he's read was about survivor children of the Holocaust, which is what brought it to my attention, because he is actually doing an event at Joshua's school in March. And I was sent an email to buy his book, which I did. And then I sent an email to Tom, and he kindly wrote back to me. And thus we've been communicating a little bit. And I asked him if it'd be interesting in doing a Zoom presentation, as it's quite a long way to travel. So hopefully one day he might want to come here. We hope so.
Love to.
So he was very gracious and said, yeah, he'd love to do a presentation to us here today and talk about his book, himself, his journey, and what's the potential for kids to enter into that realm, as in work-wise, of the literary arts. Is that about right, Tom?
Yeah, and shall I? I thought I'd do like a 10-minute introduction. Then can we chat? Does that sound good? Like questions and yeah.
I will leave it to you.
Brilliant. That sounds good. Thank you very much. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for being on my screen. My name's Tom, and I'm a children's author from the UK, and I write about what I'm really interested in. And I started off my writing career writing about football, and I've done various football series, including a series called Football Academy. A series called Football Detective, which is like a crime and football series. I've done a sort of a rebooted version of Roy of the Rovers, which was a football comic back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I've done ghost stories as well. And when I started off writing, I was not very confident, but I felt confident writing about football because it was something that I knew quite a bit about, and I felt if I was going to write about anything with confidence, it would be football. And it went quite well. And because it did, I started to want to write about other things, like other subjects that were close to my heart, because I really believe that it's important, if you're going to be a reader or a writer, to read and write about what you love, what you're interested in. I struggled with reading when I was younger, and what got me into reading was my mum getting me to read about football in newspapers and magazines and books. And gradually I became a confident reader through reading what I loved, the sport that I loved. And that's how I became a reader. And that's also how I became a writer. But once I'd done a few football books, I kind of wanted to do history as well. I'm really interested in history. Particularly, I suppose particularly the First and Second World War is what I've been published. I am interested in other elements like the Roman Empire and all sorts of other areas of history. But the area where I've had most success is history fiction. And briefly, I'll tell you about what I've done, and then I'll tell you more about After the War, which is the book that we were that Jeff was talking about. So I've done a book called Armistice Runner, which is about the First World War, but it's also about a girl who's a runner in the UK in the modern day. So she's a runner. She's trying to excel as a runner, but she can't find a way of winning races. She comes third, fourth, fifth, and she wants to win races, and she's really struggling. And she discovers through her grandmother that her great-great-grandfather was a trench runner in the First World War. And she finds his diary and she reads it, and she realizes that he went through hell, literally, well, almost literally, went through hell by running through the battlefields of the First World War. And that encourages her with her running, and she becomes a stronger runner because she's found out why he ran and what he had to go through. And that went pretty well for me. And so I was encouraged, and I wanted to do another history book. So I did a book about a dog called, in fact, I can show you him, Glenn. And Glenn was a parachuting dog. That's Emil, his handler. And he was a parachuting dog in the Second World War. And this is a story about a parachuting dog. And it's a true story about a dog that took part on the 6th of June, 1944, the British, American, Canadian, and other countries' efforts to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation. And that did really well as well. It sort of won a national prize in the UK, which was astonishing. But anyway, I've also done books about the Navy in the Second World War. This is about the Arctic convoys in the Second World War. But the book that we've been talking about is After the War, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about why and how I wrote this. It's a true story, and it's about a group of children. Sorry, I'm just going to tell my dog something. Finn, stay there. Finn, stay. Good boy. I'm just trying to stop my dog chasing the cat. Forgive me. Anyway, good boy. So this is a true story about a group of children who survived the Holocaust. This is a picture of them when they arrived in England in August 1945. They were liberated in Theresienstadt concentration camp, but many of them had been through some of the other concentration camps, and the story is very much based on the absolute true stories, the testimony of Holocaust survivors, such as Sir Ben Helfgott, Ike Alterman, Ben Helfgott's sister Marla Tribich, Arek Hirsch, and several other Holocaust survivors who I spoke to, whose books I read. I went to see them doing talks, and I based every scene in here is based on their testimony. And I worked with two prominent British Holocaust historians to make sure I got my facts right, because it's really important to me if I'm going to write about any phase of history, such as the Navy and the Second World War, but particularly the Holocaust, to get my facts absolutely right for obvious reasons. And so I wrote this story with the help of the survivors, and it's basically, the story is about 300 children, and you may have come across their story. There was a film out recently called The Windermere Children, and it's 300 children who were liberated from Theresienstadt and then were brought over to the UK by the Royal Air Force, funded mostly by the Jewish community across the UK. And they were brought from Theresienstadt, which is near Prague, and brought to the English Lake District, which, if you don't know where that is, it's sort of the northwest corner of England, and it's beautiful. It's got lakes and rivers and mountains, and it's in my opinion, the most beautiful part of England. And so it's a true story. And the story takes from the day that they flew from Prague to the UK, and then what it was like being in the UK once they had arrived. And it tells a story of August, because they arrived on August the 15th, It tells the story of August, September, October, November. And by November, they began to disperse. A lot of them went to live in other British cities and became British citizens. Many of them went to London, Manchester, Leeds, Glasgow, Gateshead, where there were large Jewish communities who took them under their wing. And many of them also went to the United States and other countries, and some went to Palestine. And so that's the 4 months that is covered in the present day in the book. But the story also relies on flashbacks. So, and what it does is through the main character, who's called Yossi, who's based quite a lot on Arik Hirsch, and then the two other main characters are based on two of the other survivors who I've met and worked with. Yossi has flashbacks, and initially when I wrote the book, the flashbacks, because this is a children's book, this is a book for children aged 10 and above. So initially the flashbacks didn't go into too much detail, and they didn't go into too much detail. But one of the things I do when I write a book is I try to show it to the people who it's about and who will be reading it, to get their feedback before I finish it, and then I can make sure I get my facts right, and also I get the book right for the readers that I am writing for. So I showed it to the survivors and their families. So the families of people like Sir Ben Helfgott read the manuscript before it was published, and pointed out several things that it would be better if I took out the book, and suggested things that I could put in. So that was really, really useful. And it was also really important for me to have the blessing of those families, because I don't want to write a book about the Holocaust survivors, true, real people who suffered those things, without their absolute okay with what I've put in the book. But I also showed it to a group of children. So this book is set near a place called Ambleside, which is a beautiful little village in the Lake District. And I went near there as a place called Grasmere, which you might have heard from. That's where Wordsworth was from, the English poet. So I went to Grasmere, and I met some school children there who were aged 10 and 11, and they read it. And one of the things they said is, we really like it, we think it's really interesting, but we don't understand. They said they didn't understand what the events of the Holocaust were. They felt like I had not told them enough. They didn't particularly want to go deep into the terrible nature of the Holocaust, but they wanted to understand the facts. So that made me change the book quite a lot. So it begins with the day the Nazis invade Poland, and then some of the rules that the Nazis imposed on the Polish people, such as handing in bicycles, the removal of pets, etc. Then taking people away from their houses, and then it moves on, flashback by flashback, to the ghetto, and then forced labour, slavery, and then it goes into the concentration camps and death. Sorry, I was muted then briefly. And so what I did was respond to what the children asked me to do, and they wanted to understand the events of the Holocaust and how they happened and what impact that had on the families who suffered that and the survivors. And so that was how the book came about. And it was very, like, I wrote the book, but I very much had the help of the children who are going to be reading it, the people whose story it is I'm telling, and historians who made sure I got my facts right. And that's basically the story. And it's a story, although obviously it's about the Holocaust, it's a very dark and difficult subject. It's a story really about friendship, because in the absence of families, most of the children who ended up in the Lake District, in this group of children, had nobody left, absolutely nobody. And in the absence of families, their friendships and the friendships they formed and went on through the decades became a really important part of their life. And in the end, that's what the hope is at the end of the novel. The hope is that by bonding as friends, they are managing to keep going in life. Anyway, that's what After the War is about, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that anyone would like to ask about this book or about anything to do with what I've been speaking about. But I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, so I'll hand you back to Jeff, probably.
Stephen, I just wonder what team you support, and then something else.
Leeds United.
Okay, sorry about that. That's right. You know. No, what I really wanted to ask is actually about the principle of the football books. I'll get to the other stuff, but did you find that it created a different level of readership with younger people because it was something that they too were interested in? I find people don't read because I think the books that are fed to them don't interest them.
Absolutely, yeah. I think for me, the thing that, as I said, that got me into reading was football. And when I started to write, I was kind of thinking I'm going to write the books that I would have liked to read. And when I started writing this was 14 years ago when I started writing football. There wasn't much children's football writing around. Now there's loads. There's at least 10, 15 authors at it, including professional footballers who have ghostwriters. And football fiction is a very popular genre. But I do find that, like, this series is basically football, just football, and I find that slightly, boring's not the right word, tiresome, like just writing about football. So what I try to do is blend in stuff like a detective story based in the world of football, or a ghost story set in a football stadium. And I try very much to mix it up a bit and not just tell that sort of basic football stories, although in the case of this series I did. But absolutely, yeah. And I think I get a lot of work in schools in the UK, going into schools, because teachers want me and librarians want me to talk about reading about your passion, reading about football. So that's worked out quite well for me.
I think that would encourage kids to read more if you're reading more, what could be a passion. We have a particular school that we look after as an outreach from our synagogue, and I'm thinking, to talk to you about, getting some of those books to distribute to the kids that, they're younger kids, but that's what they read, I think,
Yeah.
That some of the stuff that we get otherwise.
And it's really important. Reading for pleasure. Reading for pleasure is what it says. It's enjoying reading, which is why giving Charles Dickens and Shakespeare and whoever to a bunch of children who aren't that strong readers is possibly gonna put them off. But giving them a story about a football team when they're really into football, or a dancer when they're really into dance, is going to be a really positive way of enthusing them. And not just books and not just fiction, but non-fiction, graphic novels, magazines, everything, trying to encourage reading, whatever it might be.
Josh Lewis has a question. I'm going to ask Josh to unmute himself and go ahead.
Hi, Josh.
Hey, Josh, we're not hearing you.
Hello?
Hearing you now. Go ahead.
Okay. Was it difficult finding the sources for your book about the Holocaust?
No, that's a really good question. No, because I was really lucky that in the UK there's a network of people, there's a network of people at universities, but also charities who are trying to tell the story of the Holocaust so that we all remember it, and it makes us reflect on current events as well. And basically, there's a guy who called Trevor Avery who knows lots of the survivors who came to the Lake District, and he's done a lot of work in recording their stories. There's a website called ldhp.org.uk where you can listen to many of the survivors who came as part of the Windermere Children, and you can listen to them. And I went to meet him, and he introduced me to some of the guys, and but he also introduced me to material and things I should read, and he told me lots of stories, and then I pieced it together from there. But then even while I was writing, he was guiding me all the time. He was saying, you know, because I put 2 or 3 scenes in it which wouldn't have happened, and he said, you can't put that in it, because if you're making something up, and this has happened to him. He said, if you make something up, Holocaust deniers will say, well, where did you find this out? And I've already had emails from people saying, you know, this isn't true, you know, that couldn't have happened. And in every case I can say, well, actually, this scene that you're disputing, that is from the testimony of this Holocaust survivor, and I can send them it. And obviously they don't really want to hear that. They just want to deny the Holocaust. But I know that this is rooted in the truth. And the only reason for that is because I relied on the generosity of other people helping me tell the story. Good question. Thank you, Josh.
Tom, a couple of questions. First, is your interest in the book and the background just purely because of your own historical interest? Do you have any Jewish background at all? Is that first what led into it? And second question, how did they all fare? You know, can you sum up something about the group? You know, have they been exceptionally well achieved? Are they very normal? Have they had psychological problems more than the average population, etc., in the decades since?
Yeah, well, I can. There's probably better people to answer that than me, but I can answer from what I've heard. But initially, I was into the idea because my wife heard a radio program about the Windermere Children, and she said, this is what you've got to write next. And she's very involved in what I choose to write. And she was also, because I love the Lake District, and as a child I spent a lot of time there. That was the reason that led it to me, my wife's insistence that I write it. As for the guys, I mean, the one of the first things they did when after they was to educate themselves. They focused very much on educating themselves, because as you know, they will have been denied education. They were all about 15, 16, 17, well, most of them when they came. So they'd lost, like, you know, all the secondary school in the UK age groups and a little of the earlier years education as well. So but they learned English, they educated themselves, and I mean many of them became very prominent and very successful in business. Many of them didn't, and some of them, you know, it didn't end happily for them, but so many of them got together and formed what's called the 45 AIDS Society, which is a charity where they work together and do events and fundraisers to raise money for other refugees through the years. And I think that their friendship and their togetherness formed that wonderful group of people and the good work they've done. But of all of the survivors that I've met, they're the ones who are comfortable talking about it now. Most of them didn't really talk about it until the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, but they didn't, you know, it wasn't something they wanted to talk about. But the ones I've met and listened to are the ones who've told their story. There's a really good book by Martin Gilbert called, what's its name? The Boys, sorry, it's called The Boys by Martin Gilbert, who's a historian, that goes through what happened to the 300 children who came to Windermere, but several went, so a few hundred went to London, many went to Southampton on the south coast of England. And the most notable one I met, and the Leo character is based on this guy, is Sir Ben Helfgott. And Sir Ben Helfgott came to this country and taught himself to read and educated himself and lived in London. And he was very interested in sport, and he became a British citizen, was really into weightlifting. And he ended up representing Team GB in the Olympics and winning medals at the Commonwealth Games. And he's, as I've already indicated, he was knighted a few years ago, and he's a remarkable man. And they all the ones that I've met, they all are. But I have heard stories that I can't put numbers or proportions, that a lot of them, didn't want to talk about it ever, which is, their absolute right. And a lot of them, it didn't end up so well for them. Does that, and psychologically, there are some books. There's an author, I've forgotten her name, I'm really sorry, but it's called Survivors, and it came out last year or the year before, and that goes into the psychological impact. If I'll find out for you later, Jeff, and I can send you the details about the book. But it's a study of Holocaust survivors and the psychological impact of what happened to them, and how they managed or didn't manage to sort of push on into a life after what had happened to them. Sorry, I'm being terribly inarticulate.
I told Michael Thompson that we got a lot of things in common. The first one being learning to read through sports books. I was a slow reader and started with the Everest Expedition and Kon-Tiki because I'm that bit older than you. I knew you were going to say Leeds United as the team because I started off with 5 years at Carnegie College in Leeds and used to live in Leeds as well.
Right, very good.
Hillel Academy, which was set up by the Jewish organization here in Jamaica. It's a secular school. And I think Jeff's been in conversation with you about the idea of having a Zoom conversation with our students. I love the book. I love the involvement of the Leeds Jews as well in it. What sort of age group do you feel the book is really aimed for? And who are you most comfortable speaking with?
I've written it, I suppose, like 10 plus, age 10 plus, but I do work in schools with sort of 10, 11-year-olds, and then into secondary school, which is called Year 7 in the UK. And so that'd be like up to 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And I've done quite a lot of work with UCL, University College London. I've adopted this book as a way of working with teachers to get teachers to encourage children to understand about the Holocaust as well. And we work together to target 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. And I've also worked with the Anne Frank Trust, the UK part of the Anne Frank Trust, and they use it with, they're comfortable using it with Year 5 and Year 6. And I am too, but I suppose if it was Year 5, if it was a child under 10, then I'd have to make sure the teacher thought it was an appropriate book, because I mean it does as you know, because you've read it, it does deal with some dark events. Well, it will do, I suppose.
Thanks very much. I think we use the same grade, so I'm thinking 5, 6, and 7. Probably.
Right. Oh, right. Excellent. Thank you. And the guy Arek Hirsch, who's kind of loosely based on Yossi is loosely based on him. He lives in Harewood, in the like in North Leeds. He lives in Harewood still. He's still there, if you remember that bit of Leeds.
The centre of the Jewish community in Leeds when I was there.
Yeah. Well, I went to Allerton Grange High School, which is very close to Moortown. So loads of my mates were Jewish from school.
I guess I'd follow just, have you, in terms of the reception, have you had, how has the reception been? Has there been pushback? You know, like certainly in North America now, people, often parents, are concerned about content, about kids being traumatized by the content. Fact is, these things did happen, and they happened in a worse way that I'm sure you related it in your book. But has it been slow, easy going with the rollout in that respect, or, you know? And I guess my second question is for the kids here or other kids. You know, what is your sort of professional advice as to how, you know, obviously maybe someone is not going to start out being a novelist, but maybe how does one take the baby steps into becoming a writer? Would you say?
Yeah, good way of asking the question. Definitely. So it's been received really well in the UK. It's not really made it to America, and it's so hard for, I don't know, it's so hard for me anyway, but I think it's hard for a lot of British authors to get any sales in America at all. It's really difficult to break into. So I've done a couple of sessions with virtual sessions, but it's quite hard to get hold of because of distribution and the rights to books in different parts of the world. It's not great, but in the UK it's been received. I've never had anything like it, and I've written 54 books, you know, and this one is just the teachers, the Jewish community, librarians, and then that's sort of cascaded down to parents and their children, obviously, who are reading it. It's been received amazingly, and the number of organizations, the Imperial War Museum, the Anne Frank Trust, UCL, the National Holocaust Centre, National Holocaust Memorial Day in the UK, all those people have been really keen to work with me, some of them approaching me, and I think the big issue in the UK at the moment, I don't know about there, but the big issue, there's a big backlash against the boy in the striped pajamas. There's so many schools use the boy in the striped pajamas as a school text, and there's a massive backlash in the media and across libraries and schools now that book doesn't tell the truth, and that book turns the Holocaust into a fable and makes people think incorrect things about what actually happened during the Holocaust. And a lot of people, particularly UCL and that, are trying to promote this book as an alternative. Also, the Once series by Morris Gleitzman, and some other books. But there's definitely in the British media this Holocaust Memorial Day this year in January, there was a lot of articles in saying that what the issues were with the boy in the striped pajamas, and so this and some other books have had a lot of positive press as librarians and teachers wanting to, and academics wanting to promote it as an alternative to, because like about 30% of schools use that other book, and there's a backlash against it now. And as for your other question, writing for me, I started off with short things in the same way. When I started reading magazines and newspapers and short books, and it's the same for me with writing. I wrote poems, I wrote very short stories, I wrote a diary, and letters, because it was that long ago. People still wrote letters, or I certainly did anyway. And I wrote short things, and gradually I built up my writing stamina, like I had built up my reading stamina, and I became I became stronger and stronger, and started to try to write novels. And the first 4 or 5 novels that I tried to write, I didn't finish. I'd get 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages in, and it's just a matter of gradually learning. And I discovered that the two things the main thing to become a better writer: read for pleasure, read about stuff you're interested in a format that you're comfortable with, and you naturally become a better writer. But I would say with the 2 lessons that I learned with writing is that that if you do a plan, it's like you don't end up sort of thinking, oh, what should I do next? If you do a proper structured plan, it's like a map that can lead you, along the path of the story, and you can actually finish it. And planning made a massive difference to me. But the other thing that made a difference to me as a writer was understanding that the first draft is like nothing like what the final draft is going to be like. And that for me, you've just got to get the first draft down, write it quite quickly, not worry about every sentence and every paragraph. Just get down what you want to say, the story that you want to tell, and then go back to it and spend at least 3 times as much time rewriting it as you did writing it in the first place. So for me, my lessons were planning and editing, which is kind of like the before writing and the after writing. But I realized that it's all part of the same thing. And whatever you write, well, certainly whatever I write, the first draft is not very good at all. But I know that it will be if I edit it and challenge myself to improve it. And so I suppose start with short things, read lots, and don't be too hard on yourself, because the worst critic is generally yourself. And if you can just get down a first draft and then look at it and realize that it is full of problems, but that if you challenge yourself to deal with those problems, you can make it a better and even publishable story. So they're the things I'd say for those people wanting to start writing.
Tom, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your journey from wanting to write to actually becoming a writer and dealing with publishers, and how you approached all of that, and successes and pitfalls you encountered.
Yeah, sure. So I started off with years of rejection. It took 20 years to go from wanting to be a writer to actually getting published in the first place, for the first time. And that's normal, just because I was learning all the time as I was going along. And it's really hard to get a publishing deal with a publisher. So for me, I started by writing short stories and trying to get local publishers. There was one in near Leeds, in a place called Castleford, and there was one in Manchester as well. And they published short stories of mine, and one each. And that gave me a foothold. That kind of gave me a track record of being a published writer. And it didn't count for much with the commercial publishers, but it gave me a lot of confidence that I could perceive myself as a proper writer. And so then that gave me the impetus to write novels. And then I wrote 4 or 5 novels, all of which got rejected. But rejections, if you send a novel that you've written, or a book, to a publisher, they're likely to spend ages not looking at it and then give it a very cursory look and then say, oh, we don't like it, it's not for us. But if you send it to an agent, a literary agent, the literary agent is kind of duty bound to look at it and say what they think of it, and give you perhaps a bit of feedback. So I used to get feedback like, we don't believe in your characters. There isn't enough description of people and places. Your dialogue is really wooden, and that was great because they were identifying my weaknesses. And like you would with a sport, with a sports person, if you had a footballer who was, had a real desire to be a footballer, but they weren't fit enough, you'd tell them to get fitter, or their first touch was rubbish. You train them 10,000 times to get their first touch right. And it's the same with writing. You're just taking advice and taking it on board. And so gradually over those 20 years, I went from, a very uncultivated, if that's not the right word, but not a great, not a great, inarticulate is probably the best word, isn't it, to use, inarticulate on the page as I am being now on the screen, and then gradually learning what my inarticulacies were, if that's a word, and improving and becoming a better writer. And then once you write something that publishing companies think they can make money out of, they will publish you, because unfortunately that's what it's about. Like, the publishing industry is an industry, and they're there to feed their shareholders with dividends, aren't they? So that's part of what happens. So if you write something that, you know, that 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 people are going to want to read, you'll get published, because that creates sort of a profit for the publisher who's publishing you. So you have to think like that, and because of that, you kind of have to think, what do I want to write? But you also have to think, what do people want to read? And so I want to write about a girl that's a runner, because my daughter was running a lot, but the centenary to the end of the First World War was coming up. So I connected the end of the First World War with a girl who was a runner from the current day, and I came up with Armistice Runner. So it was about what I wanted to write, but it was also about what teachers and librarians and readers wanted to read. And it was the same with D-Day Dog. The anniversary, the 75th anniversary of D-Day was coming up. We'd just got a new dog, and I blended those two together. And then also I looked for gaps in the market. So I think I learned that you've got to write about what you love, as I've already said, but you've got to see what, you know, if I started writing books about a wizard who went to a wizard school, you know, I probably wouldn't get very far, because that's kind of already been covered. But I did a book recently for children about the Navy in the Second World War. And it transpires that in the UK, there's lots of books about the trenches, like War Horse and Private Peaceful in the First World War. There's quite a lot of books about the RAF in the Second World War, with the, you know, the Few and the Spitfires and the Lancaster bombers and all that. But there's nothing for children to do with the Navy. And I identified that as a gap in the market. And I thought, right, I'm going to write a book. You know, I like writing action war stories. So which stories are the ones that people are going to say, oh, I've not read anything like that before. So that's how I go about it. So I suppose what I'm saying is, write what you want to write, but keep an eye on what people want to read, or what isn't being catered for by writers or publishers at the time.
That's great. I've got another question for you. When you first started, obviously we've heard how hard it was to get your foothold. Now, once you got a book deal, how much help did the publisher give you in promotion? How much did you actually do yourself to get to where you are now?
That's a really good question. So publishers, if you're a big name and you've got a big contract, so you've been paid, you're a celebrity or someone who they really want to invest in, they'll do a lot of work on you, and they will, like, for instance, there's someone else recently wrote a book about the Second World War, and his book cover was put on the front of the Bookseller, which is the big book trade magazine in the UK, and then it was put as Waterstone's Book of the Month, which is the big book retailer in the UK. Those two things cost thousands and thousands of pounds. To be on the cover of that magazine and to be the Waterstone's Book of the Month is not something, and there's some merit in it. There is merit in it, but it's something the publisher has to pay thousands and thousands of pounds for. That publicity budget for that book was about £25,000. And my publicity for my books is £500. So immediately, unless you're a big name or the publisher thinks this is the one we're going to try and make loads of money out of, you don't get loads of support. They got me into a couple of festivals, which was book festivals, which was amazing. They put the book forward for some prizes, and I got shortlisted for one. So that was really good. But I've discovered that unless you're really, really good and you become a word of mouth success, you have to work really hard. And so I go into over 100 schools every year to talk to children and try and pretty much hand sell the books. My books don't sell that well in bookshops, but I'm really well known in schools because I go around schools and I create also on my website, I create resources like activities and create, you know, like interviews and short videos relating to any of my books, and I offer them to schools for free. Also, we spend about £5,000 a year. That's me and my wife, printing and sending posters of my books to schools and libraries. And my wife runs me, so she does the marketing, the publicity, the finances. She does the posters and the website as well. She does all of that, and I do the school visits and I write the books. The publishers make the books and they promote the books, but really I've been doing it for 14 years, and the absolute only reason I'm still making a living as a writer is because my wife is my publicist. She publishes through all the media. She promotes me and publicizes me, and that is why and probably one of the most important things she does is she manages a database, and it's got 12,000 teachers and librarians on it all around the world. But it's not just a database which sits there. She updates it every 6 months and checks that everyone's still there. And it's a really, really live, powerful tool and we send out a newsletter once every three times a year saying what I've got coming up, what free resources I've got, and all those sorts of things. And so like, if a publisher publishes this, they'll give it about, because each publisher publishes lots of books, they will give it about a week's time for publicity. So you'll get one publicist working for a week on the book. I've got a publicist working for me 52 weeks a year, and she works really hard as well at it. And that is the reason that's the reason I'm perceived to be doing quite well. But actually it's not to do with, and I hope the books are good, but it's a lot to do with promotion, because we're competing against celebrities, footballers, film stars, so-called comedians, famous people who are writing books, and we're competing against large publishers' budgets, and we're doing it at a grassroots level, which is through schools, and that works for us. But it would be nice to have a bit of the other action, but it's not happened yet.
Hi, Tom. I'm Maggie. I'm a teacher. And I just really wanted to say thank you so much. I love your book. I love the characters and how you brought out all that information through them. And I know you're talking about finding, material, where there's a space in the market for it. Well, do some more in this regard, because our young people need it. And we do need to keep learning so that this information never fades. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. And I absolutely agree with you. And that's one of the things that the survivors that I worked with writing this said they wanted to help me. Once they trusted me because of who I had been working with already, they wanted me to tell the story because they want this story to go on being told. They're getting on, and they can't do as many school visits and talks as they used to, and in time they won't be able to do any. I absolutely agree with you. And it's a really important part of my work. I love being a writer. I love making up stories, but I also love going into schools and telling stories about refugees and talking about racism and many other issues. And I do find that in the UK, I don't know about other countries, but it's this generation of children are so up for understanding what has happened in the past and how the world needs to be in the future. And I think I think part of it is to do with the fact that they do read books, lots of books, not just my books, but loads of other authors' books, and reading fiction so that you can understand what people have been through in the past can help you have much more empathy, I think.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
I noticed on your website that you have something very special that you've worked on for World Book Day on March the 3rd. Would you like to share a little bit about that with us?
Yes, the Anne Frank thing.
That's right.
That? Yeah, brilliant. One of the things that I do is I do little videos for schools to use. So I did one for Holocaust Memorial Day, and I did one for Remembrance Day on the 11th of November. And I often try to go to a place where it's relevant, so I can so I did a video like by the lake, actually on the lake, in a boat, like where these children had lived, for instance. So I like to go to places to talk about how I write and the meaning of the stuff that I write. So the one I've got coming out on World Book Day, well, it's out now, is outside Anne Frank's, on the other side of the canal from the Anne Frank house, where I talk about Anne Frank's book, because the book I'm writing at the moment is about a girl who was in the resistance in Holland during the Second World War, and she was pretty much the same age as Anne Frank, but obviously they had very, very different experiences. And I read Anne Frank's book 2 or 3 times, her diary 2 or 3 times, because I really like the stuff in Anne Frank's diary about how she talks about the people that she's in the annex with, and I also really like how she talks about things that she's really interested in, like boys and like film stars and etc. And I felt if I read that, it would give me an idea of what a girl the same age might be like, even though they're in very, very different circumstances. And so I read, but I ended up rereading Anne Frank's diary 2 or 3 times and realized that it is my favorite book. Like, thinking of all the books at the moment, I just think it's such an astonishing book, and not only because of the very, very important story that it tells and how fantastically it gets that across to children and adults, but also because of how well it's written. It absolutely astonishes me that a 15-year-old girl wrote such sophisticated character and relationships between characters, and with such a sense of humor. And I know, like, you don't think of Anne Frank's diary as being funny, or people don't talk about it as a in that way as being technically an amazing piece of writing, or a lot of people don't. But I'm absolutely astonished by it, and I really love it. And so that's what the video is about. And I happened to be in Holland researching the book late last year, and so I went and did a recording of, just to say outside her house, how much that I love that book.
Excellent. Has anyone else? Has anyone got more questions for Tom? Yes, we'll get you a long time. Yeah, we'll get you a long time. Tom, thank you so much for today. Really
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Very nice to put a face to the emails as well. And, I've got a feeling you're going to be hearing from Michael Thompson.
Excellent.
So we can contact you direct.
That's great. No problem. Thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you all, and thank you for your questions. It's nice to see that sunshine over there. It's just lovely to see all of that, because we've not had much of that here lately.
We had a big storm yesterday for a start.
Yeah, it was
Maybe decide to come here and have a holiday, and we can show you around a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'll have a word with my wife and daughter.
Exactly. Call it an inspirational trip for writing research.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and all the very best to you. See you later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Shabbat Shalom.